Alright guys, BLM here back with a new video, and in this video we're back talking about another Survivor US season. Here I'm going to be doing my cast assessment for Survivor 48. Somehow the 10th season of Survivor I'm doing a cast assessment for. Again, like all the others, I'll be running through the cast, talking my opinions on them, and eventually giving my winner pick for the season. So talk more generally about the cast. I actually really like this cast, and I did find that kind of surprising considering in the preseason when we were getting a lot of these names and their ages and occupations. I did feel like a lot of this cast just felt very samey, and there were so many people in their 30s. I mean, this is actually skewing older cast, mainly from the fact that, again, so many players are in their 30s. Again, there's only 3 people under the age of 30, only a couple people over, and again, just the majority of those people are kind of clumped into their mid-30s in a spot where, again, I felt like that felt very derivative when we were just seeing all these people that just felt like they were in a similar place in life over and over again. But actually seeing this cast somewhat in action, I did actually end up liking this cast a lot more. Now, to give context here, again, what I do with these cast assessments, I do these very early on, and I'm largely giving these thoughts based on the initial bios that came out, the 1-minute videos released by CBS themselves, along with some tidbits here and there from the RHB cast preview and some articles that have come out. But I intentionally do these before these bigger interviews that end up coming out to, again, just largely keep in line with the previous ones. But again, I feel like this is a cast here that does feel actually very reminiscent to Survivor 46's, which again was a cast with some pretty wacky characters. Ends up being a very fun season, almost entirely because of how insane some of its characters were. And I feel like 48 is a season that, again, I could see very much falling into that. I do think there's some people here that do feel very unique for the new era. So we're mixing out of the rumblings that also production seems to like this season. I do actually have somewhat high expectations for this season, but again, we'll obviously have to see. But either way, with that, we'll be running through the players in alphabetical order of first name, talking about my opinions along the way, starting it off with Bianca, a 33-year-old PR consultant, and someone that is a pretty big fan of the show, in a spot where I actually feel like this is one of the less fan-heavy casts, seemingly, of the new era, where I feel like very few of these people just come out and talk about how big of a fan they are. But again, Bianca is one of these people, and Bianca is someone that I am just kind of mixed on my overall opinions on her. I feel like she's someone that does feel kind of just normal, where I felt like very little from her truly popped for me. Though again, she is 33 years old, which is a good age to be playing Survivor. She's someone that seems to be purely affable, physical enough, again, has this potential for sure to make a deep run. And again, if she makes it to merge, I don't know if she's going to be the most threatening player on the board, where I think she would definitely have a path to potentially win the game. She is someone that I also feel like there are some hesitations here, again, in comparison to recent players. I feel like she does give me kind of Sarah Wade, Helen Lee sort of vibes, and the fact that I could definitely see a spot where she's kind of on the outside of her initial tribe. And if that does end up being the case, I could very much see a world where she is one of the first few boots. But I do think I would lean more so towards her making a somewhat deep run. Where again, I do feel fine about Bianca here, but not someone I have particularly high on my board. Next, moving on to Cedric, a 45-year-old surgeon, another pretty big fan of the show. Again, I don't know how big he is into the super fan community, but again, he is at least somebody that has been watching the show since the very beginning. One of the few people that seems to be watching the show since the very beginning. But again, talks about how it got him through medical school, and clearly does again have this attachment to the show. Again, talks about how Earl Cole is the player he'll be the most like, and really in general, I do think his bio seems pretty good. Again, he's aware how adaptable he needs to be. Again, does come off as just a purely affable guy. However, Cedric is part of an archetype that I don't feel like he does particularly well on the show. I mean, again, he is one of the older people on this cast. Again, he's only 45. It's not that old. And again, when people are in their mid to late 30s, obviously there's not going to be that big of a difference between that. But again, he's still one of the older people on the cast. Also, again, he is a surgeon, which again, I always feel like surgeons don't particularly do well on the show. Again, I always think back to someone like a Peter Bagenstos, or even thinking about someone like a Josh Wilder. Again, these players that did seem kind of aloof in the game. Though I will say I do definitely feel better about Cedric than I did feel about either Josh or Peter in their respective preseasons. But I do still worry that Cedric is somebody that could very much be an early boot. I do think he just fits in line with these sort of players that don't really gel with their tribe initially. But again, he does seem like someone that definitely has potential for the game, but I would bank on him probably not living up to that. Next, I'm moving on to Charity, a 34-year-old flight attendant. And Charity's one of these people that has one of these more sympathetic backstories of the season about how she went on this massive weight loss journey and really turned her life around. And again, Charity is a player here that on paper seems to have all the skills for the game. So again, she's now in really good shape to where again, you would not expect her to be an early boot, especially if we are on a season that is very much prioritizing physical strength. She's someone that again seems to be a fan of the show. I mean, she even mentioned Jane Aiden Bright as one of her favorite players, which to her is a bit of a red flag. But still, again, I doubt CBS is telling them to watch Survivor Nicaragua. Now, I do worry about like her like first impression on people and somehow she's like not going to be able to put on her like flight attendant face, as that's going to get her voted out. And I feel like that in general, I do get the sense from her interviews that she could come off potentially as a bit cold. So I do worry about that. Also, the fact that she talks about wanting to be a villain, talks about how Russell Hantz was robbed, which I feel like people that have said that in recent years have not gone on to do well. But again, Charity's someone that I think definitely has potential here. I would expect Charity to make a pretty deep run, though I could definitely see a world where she ends up being like this season's version of like Genevieve, and again, becomes a big target after making like a big move along the way and ends up getting taken out before the end. Again, I think that's probably the trajectory I would expect for Charity here. Next, I'm moving on to Chrissy, the oldest person on this cast, a 55-year-old fire lieutenant, surprisingly not the only firefighter on this cast. But obviously, the fact that she is a female fire lieutenant is something that is very unique here. I think the fact that she's someone that does seem to have a lot of life experience, again, talks about growing up poor, dropping out of high school, being a single mom, but then also becoming a paramedic and a firefighter. Again, I think she screams out someone that definitely has a lot of life experience, and she's someone that I would actually expect her to make a pretty deep run here. I feel like she's someone that, again, comes off very affable. I don't know if people are going to be looking to vote her out right away, especially considering, like, again, typically with older players, you would expect them to be physical liabilities. I don't think that's going to be the case with Chrissy here. She seems to be somebody that will very much be in shape. I could very much see her being, like, the Maria of her tribe. Though, like, when we're talking about, like, how she'll play the game, I'll be honest, I don't really see that much upside for Chrissy. I feel like, for me, best case scenario for Chrissy is someone like a Janet. Again, someone that builds good enough social bonds, gets pretty deep into the game, but probably gets cut before the end because they're a big threat in a jury vote, to where, again, Chrissy's someone that I think has potential for sure, especially to make a deep run. Again, I could see her, again, attaching herself to a younger guy and do the, again, Malcolm Denise thing or Charlie Maria thing, though I don't fully expect her to really have that killer instinct to make it to the very, very end. Also, again, she does talk a lot about how she's like old school in the way that she thinks about things. Again, talks about how like she doesn't like super fans and them studying puzzles. And again, I think those are also pretty big red flags for me, where while I don't necessarily think it indicates her like going on to be a relatively early boot, I just don't know if she's somebody that has this like killer instinct, has this mindset of her doing anything that she needs to do to go on to win. And I feel like she's very likely someone that is probably going to make it deep into the game, but probably going to be cut by her closest ally along the way. So not particularly high on Chrissy. Next, I'm moving on to David Klein, a 39-year-old stunt performer, and probably going to end up being one of the bigger characters on this season. Again, he talks with so much confidence and obviously has this like really funny confessional already in the preview. He talks about his muscles coming from chocolate milk. And again, I think he's someone that is going to pop as a character. I think he actually feels very old school in a way, and where I don't feel like we get many of these like super cocky, like alpha bro-y guys on Modern Survivor. Also the fact that, again, he is also not a fan of the show, which again, also very rare to see in the new era. The fact that he supposedly only watched like the first couple seasons when they were originally releasing, and since then hasn't watched the show and applied essentially on a whim just because he wanted a challenge. And again, I'm sure he's probably done his research along the way, maybe, who knows, but still, it's like, again, he's not coming in this season with a lot of game knowledge. And again, from a game perspective, he's somebody that I am a bit unsure on how he will go. Again, I do think he's somebody that I don't have much faith in to win the game. Obviously, again, he's not someone that I would have faith in knowing how to navigate through the game, especially with a massive bullseye on his back, where there's no way he goes through this game without being targeted. And even if he gets to the end, I don't even know if David's the type of person that would necessarily win Modern Survivor. Again, even if he is able to break this immunity record like he talks about wanting to do, again, even in that spot, again, that doesn't necessarily win you the season at this point. And if he is actually this like very cocky person around camp, then that's obviously something that's going to turn people away and not want to vote for him. Now, again, I would assume he's probably not that way around the players themselves, but still, I do feel like he's someone that I just don't really have much faith in to navigate through a game. And while, again, he is obviously somebody that you would think you would need for physical challenges early on, I do think with the way that the meta has transformed over time, if he is this like very domineering presence early on, I would not be that shocked if he even gets sniped out of the game early on as well, because of how blatant of a threat he would be coming into the merge. To where, again, I think David is someone that I don't really have much faith in here, to where, while I actually do think he seems to have some natural skills for the game, he's someone that, again, I would not expect to be able to implement those. So again, not a potential winner pick. Next, I'm moving on to Eva, the youngest person on this cast, 24 years old. Got a lot of notoriety in the preseason for how she's the first openly autistic player to play the game, and she ends up having a pretty strong backstory here. But in terms of like how she's going to play the game, I'm a bit unsure about Eva. I think she's someone that has potential. I mean, she seems to be a very intelligent person, obviously very accomplished for her age and considering her diagnosis, but at the same time, I do feel like Eva is someone that just feels like a bit of an outlier on this cast. Again, she is the youngest person on this cast at 24. Next youngest is 28. And again, with the majority of the players on this cast being in their 30s, I do think that is a bad sign for Eva here. Now, again, not necessarily on how far she's going to go in the season, as again, I think there's definitely a shot that she makes it pretty deep. Again, she is, again, very physical to where I would not expect her to necessarily be an early boot, though too far I would not rule it out either. But again, still, like, I would expect her to have a somewhat deep run. I do think she has skills for the game, though I do think she's probably going to have some trouble here fully connecting with the rest of her tribe, just because I feel like life experience wise, she's just, again, way younger than almost everyone else on this cast, where again, another person here that I would not be shocked if she makes a deep run, but someone that I would struggle to see make it to the very end. I think in many ways it kind of reminds me of Noelle in that light, where again, another person not moving her on as a winner pick. Next, I'm moving on to Joe Hunter, a 45-year-old firefighter. Again, another firefighter on the board. And Joe is someone that instantly comes off very likable. Again, he has this very sympathetic backstory about losing his sister due to domestic violence and her being this massive Survivor fan, and he's going on the show in her memory. And again, that's a very sympathetic backstory. And mixing that with the fact that Joe himself just seems like a very affable presence. Again, someone that seems to be very likable, someone that got a lot of screen time in the previewed, where again, I think that is a sign of his importance to the season. And also, again, seems very physical, is a family man. I think there's a lot of upsides here, to where, again, I could see a world where he becomes like the new era version of Jeremy. And I do think if this was probably an earlier season, I probably would have Joe as a potential winner pick. However, I do think, considering we are in this spot, again, with the meta of the new era, I do think that works against Joe here. Again, being someone that, again, is probably going to be one of the alphas on his tribe. Again, him being a firefighter. While I know that he's talked about, again, wanting to lessen his threat level, not come off as a challenge beast, I do feel like he's somebody that is probably just naturally going to be that way. While, again, you obviously have someone like a David that's definitely going to outclass him in that light, I do feel like eventually the spotlight's going to be put on Joe. And I can even see a world where Joe is actually even a bigger target than David, where Joe is someone that, again, has more to him than just his physical strength, in the sense that he also, again, is this family man, blue collar, again, a very sympathetic backstory. I do think Joe just screams out to me as someone that is going to be this massive jury threat. And the fact that I think almost everyone's going to know that, to where, again, I think Joe is somebody, again, I am expecting to make the merge. However, I just struggle seeing him actually making his way to the very end. I think he is someone that is just too blatant of a threat, especially on a season where we get so many people talking about wanting to manage their threat level. I do feel like Joe's attempts to manage his threat level are simply just not going to be that effective when we have almost everyone else trying to do the exact same thing. There again, Joe's someone I would expect to be like a mid-game boot. Again, kind of in line with the likes of like a Danny Massa, Gabe from last season. Again, I don't have much faith in him to go on to the very end, though I think he's the type of player that if he gets to the end, he very likely is winning. But again, I would just not expect him to actually get there. Next, I'm moving on to Justin, a 29-year-old pizzeria manager, and another one of these people that has, again, a sympathetic backstory. Again, he is running his parents' pizza shop after his mom was diagnosed with cancer, and despite the fact that he graduated from Yale. And again, I think Justin seems like someone that, again, another really likable person. But I will say, from his bio and his video, I really did not get much from Justin. Like, he just seems kind of fine, where I think on paper, he's someone that I actually expected to be one of my winner picks. Where, again, he is this long-haired guy, seemingly chill guy, but also secretly smart. Again, went to Yale. Again, you would think that's a recipe for a lot of potential here. If he's able, especially if he's able to mask his intelligence, if he can be this like Xander style player, but then really pop at the very end. Again, I think Justin's someone that has a lot of potential, but then watching his interviews, he just kind of came off a bit bland. Well, again, I think he has a pretty good bio. It was his video that kind of turned me away from potentially picking him, even though, again, I think he's still someone that, again, I would expect to have a somewhat deep run here. I don't really see a reason why he would be an early boot, unless, to be fair, he could come off as like a Jelinski style player, for all I know. But again, I would expect him to make a somewhat deep run, but someone that I just don't know if I have that faith in his overall game ability to pick him as a winner pick here. Next, I'm moving on to Camilla, the only Canadian on this cast here, a 31-year-old software engineer, and someone that instantly, again, comes off as one of the bigger characters on this season. Again, someone that just seems very fun in her interview. Someone that, again, I could see a world where people find her annoying, though I do find her to be a very humorous presence. Someone that also seems to be pretty self-aware, even if it is to the point where she is very aware of her downsides. But again, like, talks about how she's like failed a lot in her life and feeling like getting into the right college, getting the job she wanted, and obviously uses that to try to say that she's going to be adaptable likable in the game of Survivor when, again, I mean, I guess. Again, she is a big fan. She is someone that, again, I very much would want to do well. I feel like she just comes off very likable to me, but seemingly also aware of the type of game that she needs to play, and talks about she wants to play like Erica, which I do think is probably the best strat for her. And I think she could pull it off. Again, if she ends up making it to the merge, I think she will be underestimated. And at that point, if she's able to pop towards the end of the game, again, I think there's a lot of potential there for Camilla to go on to win the game in the way that Erica did. To where, again, I think Camilla is someone that I actually do feel decently good about if she's able to make it to the merge. So while there are a lot of red flags here, I just like Camilla, and I feel like that's enough to make her a potential winner pick for me. Next, I'm moving on to Kevin, a 34-year-old finance manager, and Kevin's someone that right away was someone that I was thinking of as a potential winner pick. Again, he's someone that, again, good age to play Survivor at 34, seems to be very well-rounded, physical enough, very sociable, even though I will say there was a weird part of his bio talking about how, like, he worked in engineering, but then quit engineering because he wanted to do something that allowed him to be more social, which ended up being finance, I guess. And that was just a weird explanation of all that. But also, again, seems to be very intelligent, seems to be very aware of his perception, talks about how knowing he has to downplay his intelligence. Mind you, I do worry for someone like him that will come off like a bit too obvious. So, to be fair, we already get like a dodo moment of him in the trailer, him being cut off mid-confessional by a fly. And so, again, if that's the way he's able to act around the others, again, maybe he will be able to pull it off. To where, and Kevin's someone that, again, I definitely think has potential here. So, he's someone that I actually did very much consider as a potential winner pick. However, he ended up barely not making the cut. Where, again, I typically end up moving on 4 people here as a potential winner pick. Kevin ended up essentially being number 5. Again, for me, there is just something about him that does feel a little bit see-through. Where, while, again, I think it's a very good sign, the fact that he is seemingly very aware at how he's being perceived and how to manage that. I still do wonder if he's able to pull that off. Where, again, he even compares himself to, like, Caleb, and obviously Caleb is someone that kind of the poster child for someone that was not able to downplay his threat level. Where, again, I do think those worries there do leave him off my contender list, even though, again, he was pretty close. Next up, moving on to Kyle, a 31-year-old attorney who also is another person very similar to Kevin. He seems to be very aware of his perception, trying to downplay his threat level, talks about being the most average player that he could be, seemingly someone that's, again, physical enough, social enough, strategic enough, but someone that doesn't really excel at any of those things. And again, I think that is a good read from Kyle, that those are things that definitely benefit you in the modern day. Where, again, I think that is obviously a big thing in the new era, is managing your threat level and not peaking too early. And I feel like Kyle is someone that does seem aware that he has to do that. And another one that, again, seems to have a lot of life experience. Again, used to be a teacher, now is an attorney. Again, decent age for Survivor at 31. So I think there's a lot of positive signs here for Kyle. And he is someone that I am moving on as a winner pick. Again, kind of in this strange spot where, again, I think there are a lot of similarities between Kyle and Kevin. So I think on paper, Kevin definitely feels like the better pick. Definitely seems to excel more, again, potentially socially. And probably someone that I would have more faith in that if he's able to get to the end, he would go on to win. While Kyle is someone that I feel less of that. But I feel like that's also what props him up here. The fact that, again, he doesn't really seem to be a person that pops out in any aspect of the game. And to where I do feel like Kyle is probably more legitimately going to be able to mask his threat level in the game. So again, that made me feel confident enough about Kyle to move him on as a winner pick here. Next, I'm moving on to Mary, another 31-year-old, a substance abuse counselor, which I believe was the same occupation as Carolyn from 44. So again, another person seems to have a lot of life experience about having done the Peace Corps, AmeriCorps. And I think there are a lot of things that she mentions here that does scream out as, again, she probably has a lot of life experience. But she herself also says that she's a bunch of contradictions. And I'll say you do notice that through her bio. And she literally says the words to describe you: chaotic and thoughtful, which I feel like are on two polar opposite ends. Also, she talks about like the players she wants to be the most like are Kenzie and Ben Driebergen. Or again, the fact that she's like super high on Ben of all people is, again, also a red flag for me. Though Mary is someone that, again, I think will probably end up being a really interesting presence on the season. And definitely feels like the person that is most likely to be loved by the Twitter community. But I do feel like Mary is someone that, again, does give red flags here. I feel like there's definitely potential for Mary to be an early boot. She's just someone that feels like a bit all over the place in terms of how she talks about the game, to where I really do not get any real sense of how she's going to play. And I feel like she is in an archetype that, again, does again, typically end up being a relatively early boot, where I can definitely see a lot of like gem potential in Mary here, to where, again, did not ultimately pick her as a winner pick. Next, I'm moving on to Mitch, a 34-year-old PE coach, but also the first player on the show with a speech impediment, with him having a stutter, and someone that, again, feels entirely unique for the show of Survivor. And I'm very happy that someone like Mitch is here. So I feel like he's like a new type of diversity that was lacking from the show, where, again, I'm really interested in seeing how Mitch does and how his stutter ends up affecting his game, though practically I actually don't think it'll matter that much. Now, as again, there are worries about obviously communication issues, but I do think as a whole, Mitch is someone that, again, I think comes off very likable, and it's something that I think might actually gain him social capital in the game, to where I actually feel like that's actually my biggest red flag for Mitch, is the fact that, again, I don't think his speech impediment's really going to harm his game too intensely. I think the bigger issue is the fact that I think he'll probably become a big threat. People talking about how good of a story he has, and through that will struggle to get to the very end. Mind you, again, I thought someone like Jam Jam also would have had too big of a threat level to get to the end, somehow made it to the end, where, again, maybe Mitch can follow suit with that, again, maybe somehow fall under the radar and sneak his way to the end, where, again, I think if Mitch gets to the end, especially playing a somewhat aggressive game, I think Mitch is definitely a shoo-in to go on the win. Now, outside that, again, a couple other red flags, particularly in the fact that he talks about his favorite players are Spencer Bledsoe and Joe Ingles, which hopefully he's not a super fan, because if he is, I think that's very worrying. But to be fair, I mean, even saying Joe Ingles is one of your favorite players is probably already enough to not be a super fan, even before all things went down with Joe. But again, Mitch here is someone that, again, perfect age to play Survivor. Again, seems pretty affable, seems pretty physical. I mean, I know he talks about running marathons, and again, I think there's a lot of potential here for Mitch. I just think, again, I would see him struggling to get to the telltale end, which is why I didn't move him on as a winner pick. Next up, moving on to Say, I believe is how you say her name, a 30-year-old marketing professional, even though I believe she quit her job for the show. But Say is someone that I actually am very conflicted on here. In many ways, she actually does remind me of essentially like an older version of Marianne, in the fact that, again, she's 30. So again, this essentially feels like a more grown-up version of Marianne, and the fact that she does seem very like strong-willed, the fact that she does seem a bit quirky. Now, also, again, outing into the maybe not super fan part of it, she does talk about loving the tenacity of Drea, which I don't know if I would love the tenacity of Drea. Also talks about like her attitude was inspiring, which But again, she is somebody that does come off as a fan of the show, someone that seems pretty athletic. Again, talks about like playing volleyball and swimming and hiking. Also seems to be very good socially. Mind you, I do worry in that sense as well, and the fact that she does talk about how she has a tough time relating to emotional people, which I did feel like that was a major red flag there. And that may be implying like an inability to work with everybody. I think that's definitely something that I would be a little bit worried about. But overall, again, Say does seem like somebody that has potential for sure. But again, has those red flags that were enough to not make her my winner pick here. Next, I'm moving on to Shaheen, a 38-year-old debate professor, also known as Beard Guy, where, if you do not know, he was the alternate for Survivor 46, in a spot where during a lot of those pregame interviews, we got a lot of talk about this Beard Guy, this guy who made an impression on pretty much everybody in Ponderosa, mind you, not necessarily in a positive way. There were definitely a lot of people that did not seem to really gel with Beard Guy. But again, Beard Guy's now on Survivor 48. And Shaheen is, again, someone that I am really excited to see here. Again, he's someone that obviously, again, made an impression on a lot of people. And again, it's implied that he may have made more impressions on the people on this season as well. Though, again, he definitely seems to be this like larger-than-life personality. Again, someone that definitely makes his impact. The question is, why? And this is something I would love to find out, is, again, listening to his interview, again, I was expecting him to be this like really wacky character. He seems very normal. Again, definitely like high energy and someone that is very excited to be there. But again, not really to the level of this person that, again, seemed to make this big impression on everyone else, but someone that I do think should be very fun for the show. Again, I think he is someone that may be this like big villainous sort of figure. Again, in the way that like Russell Hantz is necessarily a villain, but someone that is probably going to be playing the game extremely hard, but also in a way that I don't expect him to be this like big mastermind in the game. Where again, he talks to himself about how he needs a strategist as an ally, as he's a big like idea guy, but he needs a person to tell him which ideas are good. And I think that's a spot where it comes off to me as him being, again, probably a player that I could see having a lot of influence, playing a very aggressive game, but not necessarily being the most strategically sound. So I kind of see him like as the Shan in a Shan and Ricard style duo. But again, someone that I think should be very fun to show, and someone that I am actively rooting for. I think he should be really interesting to see. And again, I think continuing the trend of what happened with the other 46 alternate in Rachel, who went on to win Survivor 47. Again, I think there's a shot Shaheen somehow wins Survivor 48. Again, I am moving him on as a winner pick, despite, again, there definitely being some red flags there. Next, I'm moving on to Star, who is one of the younger players on the cast here, 28. She calls herself a sales expert, whatever that means, and is someone that does feel like this larger-in-life character. I feel like Star is someone that is, again, primed to be one of the biggest characters of the season. My question is, how long will that last? Where I think it can go multitude of ways. Again, she's someone that just has this very infectious energy to where, again, I could see a world where people just adore her and want to keep her around, though I could also see a world where it's a bit much and people end up being annoyed by her and end up wanting to vote her out early. Again, I could see it going both ways, but I do think there's a lot of potential here for Star to be able to be this very likable presence early on and be able to ride that momentum. But I will say, I do actually still feel very worried for Star, especially considering the fact that I don't believe she's that big of a fan of the show. I believe she's a very recent fan and someone that I didn't really get the greatest sense of her overall game ability from her bio, where she really just mentions like wanting to play like Sandra, Marianne, where again, pretty much everyone says Marianne at least, but also has a red flag in saying that she's like very shy and introverted, where again, that's weird considering the fact that again, she does come off as this like massive presence, where again, I do think again, there are red flags here. I think there's definitely I think there is a lot of worry of her coming off as a bit much for people, but I do think there's also this potential of her doing pretty well if she's able to make it to the merge. But I still think again, she's such a big, loud personality that I would not expect her to be able to sneak her way to the very end, especially in a spot where she has win equity. So again, not really moving her on as a winner pick. Next up, moving on to Stephanie Berger, a 38-year-old tech product lead. And Stephanie here also another one of these people I could see going a multitude of ways. I think there's a world where Stephanie ends up being a very strong player here, ends up being very influential, again, is a big super fan of the show, seems to know what she's getting herself into, but there's also a part of her that does feel a bit alpha. It does feel like she's someone that's used to being in charge, and I feel like that's obviously an archetype that doesn't necessarily gel particularly well, where you see on the fact that again, she does have this like pretty kooky personality as well. Like I really just don't really know what to do with Stephanie here, where again, I think there's a world where Stephanie is an early boot, someone that again gets on some people's nerves, comes off a bit too domineering, but I think there's also a world where she's able to actually suppress all that and have a really strong endgame stretch where, I mean, in a way, she kind of reminds me of someone like Rachel last season, but just with a like kooky personality and one that, again, maybe like a little bit more tendencies to be a bit more alpha. I could see her trajectory in the game being somewhat similar to where, again, I think Stephanie's just somebody that I don't really know what to do with. I feel like there are a lot of positives, but also a lot of negatives. Sort of like Rachel last season. Again, it kind of left her kind of in the middle of the pack for me, where I didn't pick her as a winner pick. And that's essentially where Stephanie ends up landing for me as well. And finally, we're moving on to the last person of the cast here. We have Thomas, a 34-year-old music executive, and is someone here that talks a big game. Someone that seems to be a big fan of the show, big fan of reality TV just in general. Also someone that has a bit of a fun personality, where he's someone that actually, like, coming into the season, I was not expecting much from him. I remember when we initially got his photo and occupation, I just thought he'd be kind of bland, but he actually ends up being, again, a fun character here. Very, like, Omer-coded, in my opinion, where that really, in general, is kind of the way I view Thomas here. I kind of see him as someone that could play a very Omer-like game, someone that is very intelligent, someone that is a big fan, someone that is not necessarily the most physical presence in the world, but not necessarily a physical liability. Also someone that, again, seems to be someone that could do very well socially, and someone that, again, is aware of his threat level, where, again, to be fair, a lot of people on this season are, but again, I think there's a lot of good signs here for Thomas. Now, I think there are also some kind of negatives. I could see a world where he kind of ends up being like the John Lovett of the season. I think that's definitely a possibility. Again, I thought there were a lot of good signs here. Again, the fact that he is such a big fan, the fact that he seems to be very good socially, and the fact that, again, he's like the perfect age to play Survivor. So again, I ended up feeling pretty decent about Thomas here. So again, I'm moving on as a winner pick. There we go. I mean, that is the entire cast of Survivor 48. Now let's talk about who I'm going to pick as my winner pick. Now again, the top four for me ended up being Camilla, Kyle, Xiaoheen, and Thomas. And I'll be honest with this season, I actually don't have a like very solid winner pick. I think this is actually a season that for me, I don't think there's that many like bad picks on the board. I think this seems to be a pretty competent cast, where even the people that are on the lower end of my power ranking are people that I think have potential. But also, I feel like there's not really a big standout here either. I think it's one where everyone has their issues, even amongst my top players here. But again, narrowing down the top four here, first person I'm going to eliminate is going to be Kyle. Now, again, this is kind of weird because I actually feel like Kyle's probably the most stable of these four. I feel like he's actually probably the person that I have the least amount of like issues with, but he's also just kind of the most like bland of the top four in the sense that, again, he just seems to be, as he said, like kind of this like second best at most things. Again, not someone that is popping out too much. And again, I think that could work for him for a while, but still someone that, again, I don't know if he's really going to make it to the tail end without being targeted, and someone that I could even see like being like a losing finalist, even if he makes it there. Overall, Kyle, again, definitely has less negatives than the rest of my top 4. I feel like he also has probably the least amount of positives, to where, again, left him off at number 4. But that leaves us with a top 3 of Camilla, Xiaoheen, and Thomas. And here, I'm sadly going to cut Camilla. And I thought for a while about this, I really actually wanted to pick Camilla because I think it'd be really funny. And again, I do find her very likable. But genuinely, I think there's just too many red flags here for me to ultimately pick her. I mean, the fact that her family even doesn't think she'll do particularly well. The fact that she is someone that, again, I think is a bit of an outcast on her original tribe. Again, looking at her actual tribe, I think it's actually kind of a bad draw for her. I think she's in a spot where I don't know who her natural allies are, and maybe someone like a Mitch. But again, I really do not see her in like David clicking, and obviously I think David's more likely to be in a power position, to where, again, I do worry for Camilla in that light. But again, I do think Camilla is at least aware of the type of game that she needs to play, to where, again, I'm hoping it goes well for her, but someone that I just don't think I actually have that faith that it will. But with that, again, that means my top 2 here are now Xiaoheen and Thomas. And again, for me, this is a debate over who do I want to do well and who I think actually would do better. And again, it's a bit tough between the two. However, screw it. I'm going to go for the more fun pick. I'm going to pick Xiaoheen. And again, are there red flags for Xiaoheen? 1 billion%. Again, the fact that he was a massive name at the 46 Ponderosa, the fact that there's a lot of talk about not really gelling with him, again, that is bad. But again, I don't really care. He seems to be a very affable person, seems to be someone that, again, on paper would do well in Survivor. Again, 38 years old, decent age for the show, physical enough, seems to be someone that's going to be playing very hard, someone that, again, if he gets to the end, I think he would be respected enough to win. Now, again, is he likely to get to the end? Who knows? Again, obviously, again, I could definitely see a world where he's a mid-game boot. Again, I compared him to Shan. I think, again, there's like Gabe potential there. Again, he's someone that I could see doing very well in the pre-merge, comes into the merge with a big target, doesn't go on the win. Even beyond that, again, I could see him becoming a big target in the pre-merge as well. Again, like my Strength Survivor winner pick, I'm going to go off trends here. Again, obviously, we just saw Rachel go on to win as the alternate for 46. Xiaoheen is also an alternate for 46. And again, it seems like he's going to be a very fun player. So I just go with him. Now, again, genuinely, I would probably have more faith in Thomas. So again, even though I don't know if I necessarily see Thomas winning, I feel like he's someone that, again, I definitely see this like Omer-like trajectory for him. So again, I don't feel fully confident about anybody on this cast. So in that world, I'm just going to go with who's more fun. And I feel like Xiaoheen's the more fun pick here. So again, I'm going to pick Beard Guy for my winner pick of Survivor 48. But there we go. I mean, that is my cast assessment for Survivor 48. Now, obviously, again, like other seasons, I'll be doing a mid-season power ranking around the time of Mergatory. Also be doing a big review at the end of the season. And again, we'll see how big it gets this time. We'll also obviously doing a player ranking following that. Beyond that, obviously, again, we got a whole bunch of other shows going on currently. Traders, I'm going to be doing a review of. Obviously, summer coverage for Australian Survivor. And I guess I'm doing Challenge All-Stars. Maybe. We'll see. But obviously, outside that, again, just expect more other typical style content from the channel. I mean, straight up this month is probably going to be a pretty big one with some pretty massive videos, too big for my own sake, where, again, next Saturday, maybe expect one of my biggest videos ever talking about Survivor 50, so that'll be something. Also, again, I got my updated runner-up ranking and my Survivor Palau retrospective, so again, got some big videos coming up, so stay tuned for those. But for now, that's the video. Thank you for watching.